author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We have always been at war with East Asia, so wrote George Orwell in his classic dystopian novel 1984. The public was expected to believe hook, line, and sinker the rewriting of history in real time. And any who question, well, woe betide them. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we're talking a rewriting of history, grifters keep grifting, and why CRT is coming for classical music. It's going to be quite the show. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Evergreen, Alabama, on WNWF 1470 AM and WPNS on 1140 AM. Thank you for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Those words you think you know, well, they don't mean what you think they mean, or at least that's the impression coming out of the White House and the complicit Fourth Estate. Commonly used terms and expressions now have brand new definitions to suit the current administration. What a wonderful coincidence for a president in crisis. What's behind this Orwellian redefining of language? Well, to help with that, we're joined by economist and author, Mr. Andrew Moran. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Right, great. So, recession. It was once regarded as 2 consecutive contracting quarters of GDP growth. And now, fortunately for President Joe Biden, this just isn't the case, is it, Andrew? Tell me more.
Well, we were always at war with Oceania, or men can get pregnant now. But yeah, I mean, this is just standard Biden fare at this point. You know, reality is completely abandoned in the White House. And a lot of the time, the administration can't even get its story straight. You look at Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. She was asked, how do you define a recession? She says, oh, I don't know. I don't know how you define a recession. And Brian Deese, you know, he was caught a couple years ago by saying a recession is 2 straight quarters of negative growth. And now he turns around and says that's not the case anymore. So overall, I mean, they're looking at specific metrics that provide a positive spotlight on their administration and their policies, completely avoiding everything else. And then their lapdogs and media are doing the exact same thing. And what's funny, too, is that when the White House published that blog post saying we need to essentially redefine the term recession, then everyone's saying, okay, yeah, we need to do the same thing now.
Yeah, it's as you pointed out on Liberty Nation television, recession is defined by if you're a Democrat, this, if you're a Republican, it's that. Now, what I want to know is why are the economists and political pundits burning their reputations in advancing this idea that the US isn't in a recession, or the recession is no longer quantified as 2 contracting quarters of growth? Why are they willing to burn reputation?
Well, I'm not going to go into the motives, but I can look at their history. I mean, look at Paul Krugman, for example. He said that inflation wasn't going to happen.
If we must.
Paul Krugman, he said that inflation wasn't going to happen. Then he said inflation only impacts the wealthy. And now he finally has a mea culpa by saying, okay, yeah, and I was wrong about inflation. He also said that the Biden economy is going to boom and it's going to be great. And then the recession happens. And now he says, oh, the Biden economy boomed too much. So that's why we're in the situation we are in now. So, I mean, a lot of these guys, perhaps they look at specific data, perhaps it's their political beliefs, whatever the case. But overall, I mean, if you're just a neutral economics observer, you can't say this is the greatest economy in U.S. history. It's far from it. You know, I think the best strategy a lot of these economists are taking is saying, okay, you know, they're kicking it too. They're saying, okay, fine, we're not in a recession, but the economy is showing signs of slowing down. That's the problem, and we can't just be so gung-ho about saying, yeah, recession is here. So perhaps that's the case a lot of them are approaching.
Very generous of you to avoid talking about the motivations, Andrew. Now, I think it's quite telling that over the period of 3 or 4 days when the recession data came out, when the GDP data came out, Wikipedia, which at the best of times is not a great source for factual information, and people began rewriting the entry for the word recession. I believe it was over 40 times it was edited back and forth. And we've seen this kind of thing too in other areas, like Merriam-Webster's dictionary changing the definition of woman, for example. Now, to me, this is more than just tinkering around the edges of economic data. This is an Orwellian rewriting of history, or I don't know. Am I going too far in my worries?
It's probably a bit of both. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of bad actors out there who want to, redefine the term to put, Biden in a positive light. They don't want to admit that this is a horrific economy, or perhaps they're trying to do the dirty work of the Democrats by trying to redefine it ahead of the midterms and not give the Republicans an advantage. Because it's guaranteed the Republicans are going to say, no matter what, the economy is a recession, and that's going to help them heading into midterms, perhaps even 2024. That Wikipedia thing, I mean, that's just really astounding to observe in real time. I was on Twitter and I saw all that constant changes, and it baffled me, and this is just, I don't know what happened. I mean, the whole standard for many years has been a recession is 2 straight quarters of negative GDP growth. Now, I don't like the GDP. I don't like it. I think it's an unreliable metric, but this is the standard data point that the establishment has utilized for decades. And now, just because Biden doesn't look good, they want to change it. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think some people are opting for a middle ground on the language, though, and perhaps realizing that they are in the process of trashing their reputations on the altar of rewriting history. And people are calling it a progress recession. Now, Andrew, a progress recession, what on earth does this mean?
Well, I'm guessing it means what Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen recently said, or even Brian Deese when they said that, we're not in a recession. What we are in is an economy that's transitioning to slower growth. I mean, so they're doing damage control ahead of really horrible economic data coming out. But this whole progress recession, I mean, I've heard similar statements before in the last few months to try to justify the current economic conditions. But this is absurd. And what's another thing too? It's funny is that when you see these same media outlets, who say, we have to rely on the National Bureau of Economic Research before we make any declaration that there is a recession. These are the same people who complain that there are white people who are serving on the NBER. So I think that's pretty hilarious. And one more thing too. If you look at some of the recent economic data, it's hard to suggest that there's going to be even slower growth happening. So, for example, there was a great report from S&P Global's chief economist, and he was looking at the recent PMI data, and he found that a lot of the PMI data is as bad as it was during the 2008 financial crisis. So barring, of course, the pandemic. So looking ahead, you can't even say growth recession because there isn't going to be any growth at all. You either have the high inflation or you have zero growth or you have the Federal Reserve, destroying your currency. So it's hard to think anything at all is going to be positive in the coming months or years.
You have, for example, CNN running a headline saying that progress recession has been here for decades. As if this is old hat, everybody should know about it. And let's be fair, you're stupid if you didn't. But I did some basic sleuthing on the interwebs, and the only reference I can find to progress recession comes from the Vermont Gund Institute in 2018. It seems more like a handy catchphrase to defer concerns about an actual recession rather than being something specific that we could say we are in a progress recession. But I have a final question for you, Andrew. Now, Biden's been saying that we're not in a recession because of the job numbers. But don't the latest figures show that job numbers are also tanking?
Yeah, the headline print has been astounding. Nearly 3 million jobs created in the first 6 months of 2022. But the problem is that a lot of this growth is slowing down. You look at the 4-week average of initial jobless claims, that has been climbing every single week since the middle of April. You look at real wage growth, which is inflation-adjusted wage gains, that's been negative 4.4%. You look at a lot of the small business numbers, they're slashing tens of thousands of jobs every month. You look at a lot of the large corporations, Netflix, Meta, Tesla, Alphabet, whatever the case, Ford, all these major companies are slashing hundreds or thousands of jobs. So it's gonna slow down. I mean, and then that's inevitable. The Federal Reserve, it's raising interest rates. That's gonna weigh in on business activity. A lot of these companies, they're pessimistic. All these consumer and business sentiment indexes, everyone is bearish. There maybe have a slight uptick here and there, but overall, you look at, like, say, the Fed Manufacturing Services Index, you're saying, how can we survive another 2 years of this administration in this current environment? So overall, I mean, yeah, the jobs market, that's coming down, and then that was the only positive aspect of this Biden economy that everyone celebrated. Now that's gone. You ask, what the heck is left?
Well, there's always a progress win in the 2022 midterms for Democrats. It doesn't look like a win, but it is. Don't believe your lying eyes. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Later in the show, we talk cultural Marxism coming for classical music. But up next, after this short break, we ask how the Taliban managed to fool Joe Biden. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With President Biden announcing the takedown of Al-Qaeda number 2 man Ayman al-Zawahiri, both sides of the political aisle saw good reason to celebrate. But the fact that this mastermind of the 9/11 atrocity was found sunning himself in Afghanistan, that's a question that needs some answers. Now, has the presidential rhetoric since the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal been naught but dust in the wind? Well, to help us fathom the facts, we're joined by former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller, Mr. Dave Patterson. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Hi, Mark. Glad to be with you.
Taking down al-Zawahiri, this is a good thing, right? As in it's going to massively disrupt further terror attacks and planning.
Well, it's a good thing. And depending on how closely networked Al-Qaeda is, it remains to be seen whether this will be actually effective in stopping any further, or at least abating any further terrorist attacks. Al-Qaeda has always been somewhat of a loosely organized and loosely controlled organization. Directions and the wants of previously Osama bin Laden and now the late al-Zawahiri would put out their basic wants, and the network would go about doing it.
Okay, so what's this about him being in Afghanistan? This point to me really kind of sticks out. What does this tell us that he was both targeted and killed in Afghanistan?
Well, I don't think there's any surprise there. I mean, anyone who thought that Afghanistan would not suddenly go back to their old ways and embrace terrorist organizations, I think was terribly naive. And this simply points that out. I mean, here al-Zawahiri was visiting family. That's an interesting point. Family was probably there all along. And but nonetheless, it does raise some troubling expectations for the future.
So you say those who assumed that the Taliban wouldn't continue in this vein were being hopelessly naive. Does that include the Biden administration?
I think that's kind of a hallmark of the Biden administration. I've written quite a bit on this. They have these 2 points of views. If we give you something, then you'll naturally give us something. And why can't we all be friends?
Yeah, it's naivety is certainly one word for it. So based on this and what's happened, are we to assume that the Taliban is all too happy to coordinate with individual terrorists and terrorist organizations against the United States? And if so, how does that impact the supposed relationship building that's taking place between the Taliban and the Biden administration?
Well, I think that it puts the relationship building in doubt, but it's always been part of their nature. I mean, we are right back now effectively where we were before, and lowly 20 years ago.
So tell me about the Doha agreement. See, this has been touted by many people in the upper echelons as something that is worth the paper it's supposedly written on. What's your take on it?
Well,
first of all, could you give us a couple of the details about the Doha, and then give us your assessment?
Well, the Doha agreement was originally penned and agreed to in the Trump era, but you'll recall that President Trump clearly, or made very clear, that if any aspect of this was in any way broken by the Taliban, then all bets were off, and we were back, bombing them and attacking them. The idea was that after the United States and allies would have withdrawn, the Taliban would have been more of a good global citizen, and especially would not be a haven for terrorism and would seek out and attempt to stop any of these organizations who would like to get a foothold in Afghanistan. That clearly is not the case.
So what are the next steps then? The Doha agreement has been broken. As you say, Trump made it very clear that all friendliness was off if such an agreement was broken. What's the position of the Biden administration here?
Well, but the Doha agreement was broken by the Taliban when they continued their attacks, and as the United States and allies were pulling out. I mean, it was clearly abrogated at that time. I mean, so to suggest that somehow this piece of paper is the Holy Grail is clearly not the case. And, and what are we going to do now? I think that the Taliban understands that you can run, but you can't hide, and to set up an operation like this is quite complex. And the other thing that it shows that I think that perhaps even myself was somewhat in doubt is that we have some level of good intelligence on the ground to have identified al-Zawahiri and where he was staying.
Okay, so if the Taliban are willing to hide this guy in a so-called safe house, I believe is how they term it, although clearly not very safe, what else are they willing to do?
Oh, I think that they're quite willing to sponsor terrorism outside of Afghanistan. It's a very simple equation for them. If you'll give us funds that we desperately need, we'll basically set up a Motel 6 for you, and so that gives a lot of leverage for wannabe terrorists to have a safe haven. And you'll remember that even while we were attacking in Iraq, al-Zakari was moving about quite freely, and finally, we took out that operation with 2 500-pound bombs from F-16s. So it's very difficult when you have a cordial population to seek out and destroy your enemy when they are so easily hidden among that population. Afghanistan gives ISIS and Al-Qaeda and a variety of others that opportunity to grow and be supported.
The graveyard of empires indeed. Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be with you.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation on KSRM 920 AM and 92.5 FM out of Kenai, Alaska. Later on, we find out why CRT is coming for classical music. But up next, we're talking Liberty with Scott D. Cosenza on the grift that keeps on grifting. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
If there's one thing Americans have become good at spotting in recent years, it's a good old-fashioned piece of grifting. Whether that's BLM buying multi-million-dollar mansions for unspecified but absolutely essential reasons, or folks like attorney Ben Crump turning up at every high-profile shooting, ready to claim racism and demand the big bucks. Are we just becoming more inured to these grifts? Or are they just becoming more blatant? Well, the latest grift from Mr. Sean King pushes even those suspended in ideological belief to the edges of their acceptance. To discuss, we're joined by constitutional attorney, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza Esquire. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mark.
So tell me, Scott, what notable grift is Mr. Sean King involved in this time?
So Sean King, for people who don't, whose name doesn't immediately call to who this person is known derisively online by those of us who criticize him as Talcum X. He is the fake black guy that runs several sort of social justice movement PACs and things where he's able to earn what seems like a quite handsome living from the donations of people who are interested in seeing racism abated in the United States. And that's sort of his principal grift. The recent case, Mark, involves the purchase of a fantastically expensive dog to the tune of $40,000 for a special type of attack show dog from this trainer that does like security dog training, some type of mastiff that the King family was welcoming into their home.
Okay, and I believe there has been a turnabout in this story already, Scott. What is
Yes.
that?
Oh, and by the way, this is the Real Justice PAC that paid for this dog, which is an organization that King helms and that he has said that he takes no salary from. And of course, the reason why he says that he takes no money or no salary from it, I actually fell into the trap there because he didn't say that he didn't take money from it. He said that he didn't take a salary or a wage, right?
Yeah.
So it's convenient, I suppose, if you don't take a salary from an organization, but they buy you a $40,000 dog. In this case, the dog didn't even work out. They had to return the dog to the trainer because it was too quote unquote spirited, apparently, for the King family.
You pay $40,000 for an attack dog, which I'm sure was a lovely dog. Obviously, it's very rarely the problems with the dog. It's usually the problems with the owners. And yet they return it for being too spirited.
Well, I went to the trainer's website, Mark, and they seem to train them to be, aggressive. Obviously, only with the right people, but they're instilling aggression. And they start with dogs that are known for sometimes having problems with people who aren't expert trainers, like these Mastiffs and the Cane Corso. Dogs that often, by the way, are forbidden from ownership by insurance policies and homeowners associations because of their reputation of attacking, especially children.
So what do you think? Obviously, this is going to be a bit of speculation, Scott, but what do you think the people who have donated their hard-earned dollars to such a political PAC, and now it's being cast out in favor of buying Mr. King and his family a $40,000 dog that he decides is too spirited? Let's get rid of it.
I have been for over a year now on the Real Justice PAC mailing list, and I can tell you that the appeals for funds come sometimes daily, sometimes multiple times a day to donate for the purpose of advancing a society that doesn't have racism at its core. And
so, Scott, I have to interrupt you here. How specifically, in words of 2 syllables or less, if possible, does a $40,000 dog purchase help remove racism from society?
I'm speechless at that one, Mark. I'm going to give you like the sideways dog view, like the confused sideways head tilt.
Yeah, I'll throw you a treat.
Right.
So these calls for money come in fast and furious, and surely the donors must get a regular accounting of what these.
They don't get I don't think they get a belly rub. They don't get. They don't
nor
get
a belly rub. So no direct accounting. No
they get
belly
the
rub.
satisfaction of knowing that they've helped Mr. King advance his lot in life.
Well done to Mr. King. Let's all feel sorry for beautiful dogs, because dogs are all beautiful. Now, moving on,
it's gotta be better than real work, Mark.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's better than a real job. Moving on slightly to another story that really has my attention and interest peaked here, is that a number of big tech companies, these huge multinationals, they're calling for an extension of affirmative action. Now, the 80s is calling, and it wants its policies back, Scott. But surely if affirmative action worked, it would have worked by now, or am I misunderstanding?
That's the Sandra Day O'Connor view, actually, Mark. She famously said in her last affirmative action case that, she wasn't sure when we would still need it, but we still need it now, but perhaps not in like 20 years. And I think now we're well beyond that mark from when she discussed it that way. That's right. The story is about how these major companies, including Google and others, have signed on to an amicus brief in the big affirmative action case that is coming before the Supreme Court in the fall. And they are all arguing for affirmative action, that they want and need it, according to them. These higher education, these institutions of higher education to discriminate on the basis of race. That's what this is about.
So surely these companies, if they believe that affirmative action is still needed, there's something they can do about that, no?
Certainly there's something they can do about it, but it's funny because when you read their brief, It's actually pretty naked, Mark. They just say we want to hire people that are different colors, right? But also come from these elite institutions. And so without the universities discriminating on the basis of race, it'll make it harder then for these companies to fill their own ranks with preferred colors. And so that's the reason for their support. It's plain as day. I mean, they're not hiding that. That's what they state.
As we're in the realms of redefining things, it seems that diversity is now the same opinion, but with a different skin color.
Exactly. Mark, there is one more quick detail for the affirmative action cases, which is that the Supreme Court has separated their cases. They had joined a case from Harvard and North Carolina together to rule on them, but because of Ketanji Brown Jackson, the new Supreme Court justice, her affiliation with the Harvard University, they've split the cases. And so she's going to be able to rule on the North Carolina one while recusing herself from the Harvard one. The long and short of this means that she will be an active participant in the affirmative action ruling, and we can expect that the rule going forward will include her as a voting justice.
Okay, that's something to look forward to, I guess. Now, one more story that I want to cover ever so quickly, Scott, is in Houston, Texas, a gun buyback scheme. Now, I don't quite understand why it's a buyback because the government didn't sell you the gun in the first place. A gentleman made quite the killing, to use a phrase, by printing up dozens of so-called ghost guns on a 3D printer, taking them down and selling them basically to the government for $150 a pop. What's your take on that?
This anonymous and yet heroic American, Mark, has really done a world of good. He said he made these printable guns for $3 a piece and sold them for $50 each, which is what the city of Houston was offering as their buyback. And I agree with you, and thank you for pointing that out. It's always frustrating when people say, buyback. They never owned them in the first place.
Buy back better. It's a new campaign slogan.
It was a great demonstration of the farce of the whole thing. I think we've discussed before, I've been to some of these big buyback events, and instead of the sort of dangerous young thug type people who one would hope would be turning in guns for cash at these events, it's people who are demographically nonviolent and turning in junk guns for money.
Junk guns for profit. The America, land of the free, home of the brave, and the land of opportunity if you dare to take it. Scott DeCosenza, thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Mark. Cheers.
Now, don't go anywhere. Coming up after this short break, we talk CRT and music and why it's a blossoming time for cultural Marxism. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
According to one Arizona professor, Mozart and Beethoven are systemically oppressive. Well, what's behind this cancel-all-you-can culture that seeks to remove the life and soul from the arts? Well, columnist Joe Schaefer wrote a beautiful piece on this topic recently on the pages of libertynation.com called Classical Music CRT Comes from Mozart. And to discuss that, Joe joins us here today. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
So, Mozart must perish, Joe. Why is this? What's the reasoning?
It's because it's a systemic thing throughout society. We see it happening. And at some point, and I think reasonable observers can say we're here right now, you can see that the point is to wage war against anything that is of quality, that is of a higher quality. Imagine going through life seeing the brilliance, the achievement, be it artistic, be it industrial, anything creative, and being threatened by that, seeing that as a tool of oppression rather than something that we can all benefit from us and that makes society better. I think that the key thing to realize here is that this is used as a weapon by what we can call cultural Marxism, is what it is. And it is meant to destroy. It is meant to destroy an old order that they feel has to go. And the way you do that is you destroy everything that's good in that order. You destroy the desire to appreciate good itself is to be destroyed, to destroy the old order.
Yeah, I think you made that point rather eloquently in your article, and you suggested that even the roses must be trampled. in this push for critical race theory. Now, what you mentioned there about how anything good or of value must be torn down and destroyed. So certainly that must have a forwarding on effect, though, Joe, right? As in, it's to discourage people from creating things of beauty. Now, I know that there is something to be said for the modern art movement, and I'm certainly not a lone voice in not being as appreciative of modern art as many others. But it seems to me that we see it in architecture too, where the idea of making something beautiful that will last for 200 years, 300 years or longer. This has gone by the wayside. Now it's about utilitarianism and even industrial ugliness seems to be the driving force behind it. What's your take?
I like how you brought that up, architecture, because again, it's in everything. It's in everything we see. And I do think it is intentional it's a great leveler. They want to make everything mediocre, everything the same. Anything that gets too high needs to be chopped down so everything is level. And what you get frustrated, people don't understand, is you're hurting yourself by doing this. This professor at Arizona State, in order to make the point that, there are these young students who don't know how to read notes, therefore they can't get into music school at a university. What about the main argument that if they could learn to read notation, that would be such an improvement in their own life? It could, the idea, what is the idea that they're incapable of doing that, incapable of learning something that will improve their lives, that has merit, that goes way beyond a job or a college degree, could add so much to their lives? No, that's seen as a threat. That's seen as a tool of oppression.
Yeah, I think with this professor saying that the ability to read musical notation is a hindrance. I can't believe that she's a professor here. Now, I'm a musician. I play a range of instruments. And one area that I always wish I were better at was being able to read musical notation. I mean, I can read it, but to be able to read it better and more fluidly. But to me, it seems like what they're doing by cutting this integral part of the musical system out is they're stopping people being able to transmit the music on. So, for example, if you write a piece of music, how do you teach somebody else to play that piece of music? I mean, how do you create something that can last into the future? For example, if we find a 300-year-old piece of music today, if we find a piece of parchment with music written on today, we can play it because we understand the notational system, the same way that we can read a book that's written in the language that we speak. But if people aren't learning how to use the notation system, then surely that's breaking apart communication between the past and the future.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is a beautiful blueprint to follow if you want to destroy an old existing order. Cut people off from their heritage. Cut people off from that which elevated a civilization. If you want to get rid of the civilization, the first thing to go after is anything great in that civilization. Knock it down, destroy it, trample the flowers. It's a very potent weapon. And so when people say, why are movies so bad today? Or why is, music so bad today? I think the lack of quality is part of the plan. It is a deliberate plan. When Disney movies are terrible, that's part of it. They want them to be terrible. They don't want to create great art that would be steeped in a civilization that they don't believe in, the values that they don't follow. And it's interesting that you say that you're a musician and you can appreciate it. I'm not a musician, but I look at it as sort of, I think it's important to like good things. So, for example, I'm a sports fan. I love sports. I'm not a good athlete. It would never occur to me to be like, wow, Mickey Mantle is one of the greatest baseball players ever. He could run, hit, throw. He was spectacular, hit for power. I should hate him because I can't do the things Mickey Mantle does. What a poverty. You're missing out on this great athlete. Enjoy him, appreciate him, It adds quality to your own life. And I liked how the part where I wrote at the end, it's like saying about Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb. hating him so much that you'd rather be in the dark. That's what these people are doing. And they want us all to be in the dark. And that's the problem. And I feel it most for the younger generation, the people who weren't brought up to appreciate quality. It's not their fault, but they are missing out on so much. And that's when I talk about cultural Marxism, what they are doing to young people and just denying them the things that you and I took for granted growing up as the things that make life better. It's a terrible, terrible thing that's happening throughout the West today.
Let's get into the weeds a little bit on critical race theory, and I guess more specifically cultural Marxism, as you say, which is the driving force behind it, or so it seems. Who's still pushing this? Because it has become apparent there are activist groups working against CRT being in classrooms. There are high-level politicians talking about cultural Marxism on a daily basis. So who's still pushing this?
It's institutionalized power. You talk about the march to the institutions where they took over academia. They're dominating the halls of corporate power now in these big centralized monolithic companies. Even in healthcare, you have medical like the AMA, the ones who organizations of medicals are just controlled by this wokeness. And so you control all these organizations, you control all these authority figures. And I think this is a crucial point that I'm going to keep saying, you target the youth, you create a new normal. And so for somebody, that January 6th protester who was just sentenced to 7 years in jail frightens the heck out of me. His own son testified against him. His own son was so steeped in this anti-Trump, insurrectionist, woke narrative that he testified against his father, wanted his father to be punished severely. His father's going to jail for 7 years. We talk about the divides, left, right, it's two different countries, but we don't talk about generational divides. These young people, they don't see America. They don't see the West. They don't see things. Again, I say, it's not their fault. They've been brought up in an entirely different upbringing than really, like I said, anyone who was born before 1980, maybe 1985. It's two different Americas isn't just left and right. Two different Americas is anyone over 40 and anyone under 30. I think it's profoundly different. And that's who they're targeting with these CRT musics, these woke films, all of it, the video games. It is a systematic assault on this younger generation. We can laugh at it. It's really not aimed at us. It's aimed at them.
Cultural Marxism, heralding in the new dark ages for the masses. Joe Schaefer, thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
And that's almost it for this edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Scott Cosenza, and Joe Schaefer for joining us. And of course, my thanks to you at home for taking the time to tune in. You are appreciated. I guess my parting shot for this week comes again from George Orwell, who wrote, "He who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." And that's really what this rewriting of history is all about. By changing the past, as in the definition of words, the powers that be will be able to tell you that despite your real experience, that you were wrong. And they will hearken back to the fictionalized past to claim the future. And that way lies naught but tyranny. And that should be avoided at all costs. Thank you for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.